Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about the money you're spending collecting the licence fee, but just a sort of a daft question to me. I should know the answer to this, but I don't. In the annual report, it says the BBC is taking steps to minimise collection costs, for example, by issuing 60.2% of licences electronically. Why do we issue licences at all? What's the purpose? I have had my licence in the post for as long as I can remember, and the minute I get it, it goes into a drawer, and 3 months after that, I file it. And to be fair, I think I might have 10 years' worth of licences still filed. What is the point of actually physically issuing a licence?
We're required to if people request them.
So, and is this people who are requesting them, or is it your default position is if you don't ask for it electronically?
We would issue them unless people agree to have an e-licence, which is what we try to promote to our customers. And we also try to obtain permission to correspond with them entirely digitally and by email.
And you're required to give it if they provide it. 40% saying yes, send me one seems high to me. For given how many licence payers you've got, 40% actually affirmatively saying yes, send me this.
Not proactively asking to have one, but they're not saying that they don't need one, and we don't have permission to send them, and we don't necessarily have email addresses for all of our customers. They're not obliged to provide that.
Okay, and if you go a target for getting the number of electronic issues increased?
We haven't got a particular target. We would just try to maintain it and keep progressing with that.
Actually, I think we should take that away. Honestly, I mean, I think we're in a position where people have wanted a licence, because I think they also think if someone were to challenge them, here's my TV licence. We'll definitely give you the email address, by the way, because it's we want to move you from physical as a start. That'd be one down, 40% to go. But I think it's a fair challenge. We should just take away and think how we could. I mean, the team are trying to clearly push it to the electronic. We should just reflect on that, because most people, I think, want a physical license. Sorry, that are sitting there with physical, quite like physical, but could we move? The challenge is well taken, is what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr Davie. You spend 4.3% of the licence fee, £166 million, on collection, or that was the figure last year. Lee, what are you doing to ensure that figure represents value for money, that you're pushing that you're getting the best results you can for that?
I mean, like anything across the BBC, when we're looking at our cost efficiency, we take the teams, as we will, so Tim and I will absolutely monitor the TV licensing attempts to reduce its costs. We do that through a number of formal measures. We have a budgeting cycle and quarterly forecast reviews where we will absolutely challenge all departments across the BBC on efficiency. We'll expect to see productivity efficiency delivered and measures against that. I think one of the challenges around the cost of licence fee collection is actually related to the point you're referring to around postal costs. So pass-through of postal costs are expensive and are a significant part of the cost of collecting a licence. So, of course, everything that the team can continue to do to move online and reduce those postal costs are a big part of reducing our collection fee.
Now, you use Capita to do your licence fee collection services, and I think you're halfway through a 5-year contract extension with them, and that extension requires Capita to make operational improvements and IT upgrades to improve the customer experience and also to create these efficiencies. Have you realised these expected improvements and efficiencies, and what are they?
Yeah, sure. We established an IT upgrade program as part of the Capita contract. TV licensing sits on a very old, complex systems and suite of systems, and also quite a fairly complex supply chain. So a number of suppliers all contributing to deliver. Even within the Capita contract, there is a supply chain within that contract. So we set a program and agreed a program with Capita around IT upgrades, primarily focused on a website upgrade, but also the campaign management system upgrade. It has been challenging, Mr. Kane, for us to deliver. It has been behind its delivery. We expect it to be just under 2 years late in its delivery. And the reasons for that have been largely focused on some of the complexities around the supply chain, but also particularly we are taking a very thoughtful and careful approach to any upgrades, because it is fundamental to us that we maintain the collection of the licence fee, and of course we don't create risk in that process. And so far we've been able to handle that very, very well. We have seen challenges. We have now delivered in the core deliverables 10 out of the 13 key milestones, so we've seen important progress, albeit slow. We made a number of changes, particularly to manage that program. I meet and was meeting very regularly with the CEO of Capita, so right at the top, regular interventions, raising escalations on whether the program was delivering, where the issues were. We've situated, for example, all the supply chain technologists together in the same building. I think often when you sit in different supply chains and you sit in different buildings, it can be complex to manage. We've also changed our commercial agreement on the contract, so we only now pay by milestone. And that's important because it's really incentivized milestone payment of the deliverables and has focused the teams working on this program. But yeah, it has not delivered to time, and we continue to work on that delivery very carefully. For example, I'm meeting the CEO of Capita this week again, so that regular dialogue, I think, right at the top of the organisations are important.
Just from my point of view, two things. I mean, clearly it has taken too long, but there's two things that are important to note. One is we have not had, touch wood, any problems in terms of delivery to the front line and the customer service. So that's, if you look at the customer service scores over, they remain pretty strong actually in terms of the licence fee and delivery. That's important because you don't want to muck up the basics and delivering for the public. So while we've been upgrading, the team have done a really good job of just protecting that and actually improving that. The other thing is I just emphasise, and it's particularly for the PAC, is linking your payments to milestones. So costs don't run out of control has been smart work by the BBC team, and I think it puts us in a decent position as we get through these changes, a bit slower than expected, but in the right way.
And I think in terms of the operational side of the contract, we hold Capita to service level agreements. We are reviewing them regularly with my team, and we are making sure that where we can identify efficiencies, we do so. We are on the lowest possible tariff for all of our mailings, but Royal Mail prices continue to increase. It went up by 14.4% last year. We also, in the cost of collection you're referring to, that included the cost of making a substantial improvement to the experience for our over 75s customers who are entitled to pension credit, where we invested in a new system to support them that means that we can automatically check with our colleagues at DWP as to entitlement and issue a licence, and it now can take 2 minutes, a process that used to take anything up to 2 weeks and would involve some of our most vulnerable customers having to scan in data and send it around. The new system that we've invested in is much improving the customer experience and will be saving money as a consequence.
I've got one substantive one to ask you, but just very quickly, that seems like a really good thing that you've put milestones in place and you're tying the payments to it. I would hope that hindsight would say, well, we wish we'd done that at the beginning of the contract in the first place. Is there a learning lesson that you're taking for future contracts to do this, because you're halfway through the contract extension, you're going to want to do something in a couple of years? Will this be your new way of operating these contracts?
I think it's a fantastic point, Mr. Kane, and absolutely we put those we made those changes in the milestone plan when we had seen delay in delivery. So it was something that we did partway through the upgrade program, and absolutely if we had been clearer about doing that from the beginning, then we may have seen a slightly different outcome.
Okay, and can you just tell me, how is Capita incentivised to increase sales and reduce evasion?
They are not.
Mm-hmm.
They are not.
Not.
They have a number. We do not have revenue as a target for them. We don't believe that would be helpful to customer service or our reputation. Our service levels are around customer service. We monitor them, our SLAs, in terms of how quickly they will answer calls and the satisfaction that our customers express. So, for instance, the customer satisfaction with our field force is at 4.9 out of 5. And on average across all of our activities is at 4.7. So we want our customers to be well looked after. We want efficiency in the process, and we make sure that they are providing the service that they need to be providing. That is our clear outcome. We are not incentivising them to drive prosecutions or aggressively make sales.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Follow up on that. Sorry, why is there a conflict between good customer service and encouraging, incentivising Capita employed to try and get the money in at the end of the day as a key part of their terms and conditions? Why is it a conflict to encourage them by financial incentives?
We all have the group target in terms of revenue. So as we've talked earlier, so we are robust, having run quite a few commercial enterprises. That is fixed, it's clear, and the BBC is a very different place to it where it was in terms of driving against targets. What I think is fair is we all have experience of what you might call a commission selling environment, and a commercial enterprise going after subscribers. That does provoke certain behaviours, and I think it's a fair challenge, but it's a balanced point which says what kind of customer experience do you want from the BBC. And I think the call we've made is to incentivise the whole group together and work together against targets, not to have incentives driving against, frankly, prosecution numbers or things like that, which to me would be potentially drive the wrong behaviours. I do think behaviours are linked to incentive directly. I mean, it's something we could debate. I think on balance, I think that's right for the BBC.
Okay, I mean, some customers who are paying and see others not paying might think you might provide a few incentives to actually encourage the others not to pay.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'm sure people have different... Yeah. I think it relates to our earlier discussion about we do need tough, fair enforcement, and any system needs that. I think we have that. This is just a nuanced and balanced call in terms of the individuals and how they communicate. To be fair, I think if you look at the way we are chasing up on no licence needed, ensuring those people who are evading no licence needed are absolutely being followed up, I think, pretty robustly. Now, separately, we also have to make sure they're being treated fairly through the process, and there are groups in there that we need to make sure that are properly treated. So it's a balance for the BBC.
You mentioned earlier sort of slight comparison with knocking on doors and what we do occasionally as politicians. There is a difference though, isn't it? When we knock on a door and say, can we have your vote? We're not always greeted with a friendly smile, but certainly if someone knocks on the door and says, can I have your money? Perhaps the reactions may be sometimes a little stronger. Is that becoming a challenge about public reaction and potentially the safety of the people who go out there to do that?
We take great care of our visiting officers. We have safeguards in place to make sure that they are safe, that we know where they are, and they all wear body-worn video into circumstances that are difficult. That's how we protect them. I think probably the situation is more likely to be that there isn't an answer rather than that there's one that's sufficiently unfriendly.
Just getting people to answer the door is becoming... Yeah. Okay. Just another point. Sometimes I think it is a bit difficult for people in certain circumstances to understand whether they need a licence. And it's something maybe you are focused on in terms of the explanation and education point. I'm just trying to think, people often say, I've got a licence at home, do I need one at work as well? Or I've got a licence in one home, students in particular, where they live, then they might live in a multi-occupied block.
Yep.
Do they all need one? Do some of them need one? Can that sort of problem situation, which is quite common, be clarified better?
Well, we're constantly trying to improve the way we communicate that kind of situation. We have a number of places for people to go to find out whether they should be licensed. They can go to our website, they can call in, and the number's provided on our correspondence. Sometimes it can seem complicated, but it's usually pretty straightforward. Students, the example you gave, we have a campaign at around now, actually, where we're trying to make it clear to parents and students what their licensing situation needs to be.
Right, so there's that Freshers Week and things like that you're targeting.
We're doing a lot of communication. I mean, I take the point. What I would say as we go to the chart and we look to where the future is, I think that is also a very good point in terms of part of the assessment is, can most people just understand it? Is it clearly, can we communicate it clearly? I have to say, if you go to the TV licensing site and go there, it's pretty clear. So I take your point, but we're doing quite a lot of work to make sure it is clear.
Okay. Yes.
Just on, I wonder, Tim, do you foresee a world, might not be this chart, it might be the future, do you see a world where we move from household licences to individual licences, given that I think particularly the younger demographic think like that? They're used to having, we're all used to having subscriptions for apps that are based on us as individuals, not as households, and given the households are changing, and
the world is changing. I think it's a bit premature for me to second guess what's going to happen in terms of I think there is a big moment for the UK, and we need to decide whether we're going to move people to a digital world and the transition. That will, across a whole load, I mean, for this committee, a whole load of services, whether that be, and we've talked about the cost of postage today, that then leads you into a world where the relationship between usage and payment can be explored as in a more connected way. There is something still, I mean, maybe I'm being old-fashioned, but there is something also, I think about the household and together you getting that licence fee, which I think we need to reflect on before we give up. But to your point, I've got 99 problems. This one ain't going to be fixed in the next 3 or 4 years. So I think we've got to work on a system where we've got this hybrid world in which some people are connected to the world you talked about in terms of directly, and we'll still have quite a lot of broadcast going on for some time. So I think we need to fix that and work out where that's going, but meanwhile building the digital backbone so that we are clear about individual usage over time, and then that will provide, if nothing else, optionality.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. We will now to the wide issue of financial management. Sarah Green.
Thank you, Chair. In 2024-25, the BBC reported cumulative annual savings of 564 million, which I should congratulate you for.
Thank you.
My question, Mr. Davie, is how do you monitor the risk that the quality and delivery of BBC services are impacted by savings initiatives?
Absolutely. I mean, Lee may want to talk a little bit about this, but welcome to the very heart of most of our planning, our thinking, is how do we move money around the BBC? And this, it's worth saying that a lot of the savings you hear about are not just the lack of inflation on the licence fee, they're also about the senior team, to your point, wanting to move money around the BBC. About 2/3 of it is just moving money around the BBC where it's most effective. So ensuring that a public service broadcaster is not left behind on the iPlayer, which just happened to be the fastest growing SVOD service last year. Right. So we are constantly, and we do a vast amount of work on linking up, and I'm obsessed by this, linking up the movement of money to the creative work we do and that impact on households, and simply put, how many people are using it weekly, what value do they ascribe to the BBC, and we've got quite sophisticated modelling. If we do 31, 32 dramas a year, if I can free up money to do 40 dramas, we can measure the impact on usage, assuming, by the way, because unlike building a bridge where you kind of know what you're getting, some dramas work, some don't. Welcome to the world of television and creative work. But broadly speaking, you can forecast, and our forecasting is pretty good, on if we can save that money. And we've been, in the last few years, for instance, been moving money to ensure we're doing a little less hours on television, but making sure the potency of it delivers the audience numbers we need. And that is what we're doing all the time with our savings plan. We are ensuring that we have enough frontline content and product development to ensure that we're relevant. I think we're quite sophisticated. I mean, I have to say, around the world, other public service broadcasters are coming to us and saying, how on earth are you playing this game? Final point from me is we have been aggressive in that. Saving money, cutting headcount. I think the last 5 years I'm proud of the progress we've made, and the NAO can speak to that as well. We are still facing a situation in which our budgets versus the behemoths from the US and others, and they've been accelerating their pricing to a point where we do believe we're underfunded in terms of having the horsepower to maintain these type of numbers. I mean, we've defied gravity a bit by the level of savings and efficiencies we've got. So that is a big question for the Charter. So I've gone a bit beyond your question, but we're monitoring all the time that impact. I mean, Lee can talk in detail about the savings.
Was there something you wanted to add to that, Lee?
Yeah, just to build on what Tim is saying, I think our entire savings program is also monitored through our audience scorecards, which we look at monthly, and they look at a range of figures. We also do market testing in the market to answer your question around quality, and we have seen on a question around does the BBC continue to deliver quality content, 62, I think 63%, just over 60% of our audiences continue to say that, and they have consistently said that over the last few years of the data we've got. So I think that's a good measure for us. But I think it is becoming more challenging. When we started our savings programs at the beginning of this charter, 50% of our savings programs were productivity efficiency. We have seen that decline. as we become more efficient as an organisation. Now, of course, that efficiency drive doesn't stop. Technology, process improvement, all continue to give us further opportunities to look at across the group as a whole, both our public service organisation and our commercial organisation, to increase their profit margins there as well. But I think we've always held the view that audience impacting cost savings are the last resort. We've tried to really focus the organisation on just productivity efficiency largely, but we are, particularly now more recently, having to take more around scope cuts and what we call remixing of our content. So that may be making choices within a division, so our TV content division or within our radio division, what programs specifically are not delivering audience value, what programs could we develop that create more return on investment. It's a key measure that we use and drive greater audience value. So our choices around specificity on programs in that remix are also related to audience feedback and how we make sure we drive value for audiences.
I think this is fascinating because particularly, I'm not looking for sympathy, but it's particularly difficult at the BBC because you've got a number of multiple metrics by definition. Let me explain what I mean. If you're running a commercial business and there's no chance something's going to make money, when I was running BBC Studios, you closed it, or it wasn't delivered. You got to a clean. In the BBC, the wonder of the BBC is we can't just look at the best return on investment in terms of audience scale and numbers. Otherwise, you'd just spend all your money making facts and entertainment. You wouldn't do the precious Gallic service, the wonders of local. You see what I mean? So you're balancing where do you ensure you're delivering your purposes of the BBC, but within that being as efficient as possible. And this is tough because everyone will have a view on Newsnight. I'm just picking one example of that I could do, where we have tried to say, okay, we think we can do this more efficiently. There was a lot of debate on that. I'm a Newsnight aficionado. So now the good news is the audience has grown 24%, but we did take some money out. But I've got to make sure we're protecting the broader investigative journalism across the BBC. They're the kind of conversations we have. But we're constantly trying to work out how we can ensure that the critical things in the BBC, fully staffed journalism, journalism across the world, making sure all our local radio and our regional imprint is whole and we're not having to cut back on that. I have to say, it gets tougher over time. And disinvesting in the BBC, I think, is a real mistake in terms of the venture capital for the creative industries, let alone the value to audiences. So that's another speech. But I think, to your point, we are looking at those metrics in the round all the time. We're not trying to do anything. I mean, we've got a very smart set of people who are all, I think, pretty much all in the top tier, got significant commercial experience as well, but they care about public service broadcasting. That's the culture we're trying to create.
Can I ask about BBC Studios? Come back to you, Lee. What does a 5-year financial returns target of 1.5 billion mean? What does that mean in practice, and how is it measured?
Yeah, so we measure commercial returns to the BBC from the commercial business to the public service every year, and it's made up of a number of items. Primarily, that's the dividend payment that comes from our commercial business to the BBC Group. Studios is a wholly owned subsidiary of the BBC, and we take a dividend payment into the public service. It's all the other major component part of that is investment in programming, effectively that studios are making and supporting and the public service, so effectively making and producing programs that are commissioned by the public service. So that's also a significant part. There are other small component parts, a brand fee, for example, or other small component areas, but those are the two major ones. It's been approximately £300 million a year, roughly, on average, across the last few years. In the last first 3 years of the 5-year commitment, the studios have returned £1 billion. So the 1.5 billion will take us to the end of the charter. And if you're looking at sort of £300 million a year, you could see how we would then achieve the 1.5 billion.
Are you on track to hit that target?
We are absolutely on track, yeah.
Okay.
You're doing well.
And quite a specific question to you, Tim, if I may. Will you commit to publishing the returns value from the commercial group each year, along with an explanation of how you calculate that figure?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, we had a little dance at the CMS Select Committee, and there's no problem with us sharing that. Even this year, 24-25, I've got dividends of 161, UK production. Because this returns number is quite a strange. That doesn't mean it's strange in a bad way. It's just not. It's not it's a bespoke number, but it's important, which is as a shareholder from the commercial subsidiary, you're getting the dividend, but you're also getting investment in programming plus some other things. Okay, so we're happy to break that down. We're also being very clear about EBITDA and cash, so all fully. There's nothing that we can't share on
that 1.5 billion target, is it ambitious enough? If BBC Studios are doing as well as it seems that they are you being ambitious enough?
Well, on those two measures, I think it's quite an interesting question. Certainly investment in programming, I think the BBC Studios have to pitch to the public service for programming, and I think we'd love to see them make more, but of course we have a responsibility to go to the whole market on that. So there's a competitive tension there for public service to make that investment for studios to make that investment in public service. So I think there, absolutely, we would love to see that grow, but it needs to grow in the right way, and we wouldn't just be giving it to them. I think that's really important. On dividends, it's a really interesting trade-off. Because, of course, when we take money out of the public studios into public service, we aren't then reinvesting in our commercial business to grow. And we have ambitions for our commercial business to grow. Certainly, we've seen doubling of its revenue since the beginning of the charter to where we are now. It was £1 billion. We're now at 2.2 billion. We have ambitions for that to continue to grow in the next charter. But that does need capital. Any commercial business needs capital to grow. And we have very important and long discussions at board level around capital allocation across the group. And at the moment, we are taking more money out of our studios business into the public service than we are leaving behind for it to reinvest in its challenge. So I think the dividends line, yes, we can continue to take everything out of studios, but we need to balance that where we can drive the greatest value from the capital that we have across the group.
I think doubling revenue and seeing the profit performance we've seen is shifting for the commercial arm of the public service organisation. I'm fiercely proud of it. I mean, to get to a 2 billion turnover, the issue, Lee was touching on some very important things for the financial shape of the BBC, which is we're very ambitious for studios. I can see growth, further growth. Although the headwinds in the market more generally, as you'll have seen from other businesses, the chill winds are blowing on the production sector a bit, and it's tough. One of the things that the BBC Studios business has is diversification. So BritBox in the US, rights, dare I say, to Bluey around the world, which has been rather triumphant. Yeah, so it's quite a broad spread business. But Lee was touching on something that's very profound, which is how much do you take out of the commercial arm in terms of, is it frankly propping up the public service operation to deliver the numbers I've talked about that sustain the licence fee? There's a direct link through to that. Versus long-term investment for the shareholder, otherwise known as the British public, to build the enterprise value. And some of the investment cases we look at, if you were delivering a video on demand service globally, some of these companies aren't, from what I know, are not fully out of the woods in terms of profit after many, many years. So we have to balance the need for the public service and what it requires in terms of dividend against the long-term growth of the commercial arm and building I think actually a world-leading enterprise that creates enormous value longer term for the British public, actually. We should be fiercely proud of it. So that's the balance we've got to get. But I think we can keep growing. I really do. I'm very bullish about BBC Studios.
One last question, if I may, Jen. It's about the value of the BBC brand and how you leverage that. It must be nigh on impossible to put a value next to something as ephemeral as a brand. But how do you leverage that brand in your
I think BBC Studio, I mean, if you do visit BBC Studio, spend time with them, and you'll see enormous fact. I mean, we have created a £2 billion business on the back of that, on the back of the brand, bluntly, in terms of BBC services. BritBox with the BBC in the US, a very valuable business. They're all based on the BBC brand. I would say that there's a couple of things, which is, now you've asked, there's a couple of areas where I think are quite interesting, which is many people would push us to, why don't you just launch the iPlayer globally? Well, go home and look at the iPlayer. Most of those rights are not available globally. Sports rights, local programming. So that would be a massive investment to do that. And I think we've got to be clear. In some ways, talk is cheap. Business plans need to be robust, clear. I'm very bullish about our plans for .com, but the economics of news do not look good globally. So what's the right plan in terms of break even, making sure the world service is properly supported, etc., etc. So I don't think any of this is easy. There's no simple pot of gold. Having said that, I don't think there's one activity that I can think of that isn't production, supply, everything is dependent on the BBC brand. And yeah, someone probably can calculate it, but it's pretty incalculable in terms of for an asset for the UK.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, further questions on the commercial side? Chris Kane.
Yeah, thank you. Can I also offer my congratulations for what you're doing in terms of monetising your existing content and your focus in digital. But just perhaps, Tim, to pick up on things that we were talking about last week in DCMS, which is around creating new intellectual property. So, of your most profitable programmes last year, I think it was only 1 in 10 was from IP generated by the studios. Is that correct?
I think that was 23-24. 24-25, it was 3 of the top 10 most profitable titles were IP generated from BBC Studios.
Maybe just the sort of daft laddie question from me. Set the scene as to what is the difference between a Doctor Who brand in terms of its potential next year versus something new, something IP that you create that just grabs everybody's attention, the next Doctor Who? What's more valuable to you longer term, creating more IP or exploiting what you've got?
Both of them sound pretty attractive to me. That would be a nice problem to have. Yeah, that's my first reaction to that question. It's probably impossible to answer the question directly because it depends what shape the IP is. Is it children's? Is it this? What is utterly clear is the BBC. I absolutely take your point. Your questions were well taken at the last committee. Is the BBC's ambition is not simply to be a publisher, and the value that we can bring by owning IP is very significant. And if you look at something like, I think Strictly globally, otherwise known as Dancing with the Stars, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue at a decent margin. That is how you, it's a broader subject, but I'm slightly worried in our industry how, and this relates to a number of UK challenges, but how thick our share of the economics is. Because if you're just, we celebrate production quite rightly in the UK, but just making a production for someone else and it's their IP, or if they claim the IP, you're making quite a thin margin. Where you're making real margin is on IP. So I think it's a really good challenge to say, can the BBC produce more fresh IP? And I would say I've been quite demanding of that because I think we could do more. I think it's a really good challenge. Just one point, we are tracking now how much of our programming and how much is delivered, because we also want to help indies and the kind of people who make, the good companies that make much of our drama or Traitors or Race Across the World. But we also want to own, for the British public, our own productions and our own IP. Today, that stands at 31% of our programming. Yeah. And I would like to see that number go up. I think what we should be doing is getting that towards 40%. We've actually hired into BBC Studios new people who are chasing fresh IP, and I would like to see more Doctor Who's, not less.
How do you do that? How do you judge?
If I could answer that, I'd be a very wealthy man. But I'm not being facetious.
No, I don't think you are. But I will take the point that you could have 10 duds or 10 phenomenal successes. It's a risk game, but you've got the job of trying to work out how to do the risk reward thing. So I suppose I'm just trying to interrogate how you do.
It's all about people. It's all about talent. It's all about those people. But we have seen it is. In the BBC's game, we have to get early on in the game because you will all have seen, if you're sitting on Lord of the Rings, it is very difficult for the BBC to buy that title, or buy the IP. So what we need to do is out there shopping with UK partners, UK writers, people who can build IP in the UK, and also like-minded, so the Bluey team in Australia saw the BBC, it's to do with the brand, by the way, and that has created enormous value for us. The simple truth of the matter is it's all about people and making sure those people are given the headspace to go after it. And to your point, and unfortunately I wish I had more predictability in my life sometimes when it comes to so-called hits, it is a spread betting game in terms of you're just trying to reduce the odds by getting the right investment, the right people in place.
I'm going to push just a little bit more at this. I love the vision. I love where you're going. But in terms of them putting the policy to underpin the vision, I think that's what we're trying to get at. So in terms of what your goals for IP at the moment, you're not meeting the targets that you've got for new IP at the moment. So what are you going to do to turn that old and welcome
Firstly,
vision
we've the person leading BBC, the CEO Studios Productions, is newish, new in, fantastic executive. He's hiring in different people. We're absolutely looking at separately. This is one of the links to Lee's comment about capital for studios. One of the things we can do is invest early with people and buy UK IP and grow it together. So we are actively on the hunt, working on that, and we do not want to see all IP drift beyond the UK and be wholly owned by, frankly, largely US big companies. That is bad news for the UK public. So that's what we've got to do. The other thing we're very lucky on is we can take a bit more risk because we don't need every slot to pay out in advertising terms. We can take some swings.
Can you maybe talk about the leadership role now that the BBC plays? In that we've seen a huge debate about AI and how it's interacting with the creative industries. Can you talk to how you see the leadership role that the BBC has in ensuring a fair creative world that's profitable for everybody, including the BBC?
It's a big question, and I do think we have a role to play, and there's a number of strands to that. I think it might soak a bit more time than we've got, because there's firstly, how do you ensure, and this is a conversation that goes way beyond the BBC, but the BBC can be a leading actor in this, is if you're a creator in the UK, how are you protected in terms of unfair use of your AI, and what is the system? And I know government are working on that. We're very active in that. We believe people should be fairly paid for their IP. So that's the first thing, and what the system is, that is work in progress as we speak. The second thing is, how do we ensure that when we're dealing with the big language models, how are we making sure that we are fairly, as an entity, you will have seen us having very active conversations with some of the big players to ensure that we are fairly represented, that we're looking at the right commercial deals, but critically also the information they serve up is valid. We've had a number of issues in that, but we've successfully addressed a number of issues. And I think they're the big things in terms of us being a lead player in what the regime is. We're not going to do it alone, but I think we can be a role model in terms of the regime on AI. We also finally are highly innovative and using AI. There's not many people in the BBC who aren't using AI now. The issue is, how are they using it? Are they using it on their terms? How can we improve the media supply chain? How we make programmes? How can we increase the impact of our journalism? How we can recreate it for formats? So the other thing is, we can be a world leader in terms of how AI is used innovatively, and we could spend a bit more time on that.
You could just expand it from that, and I'll hand back to you. It's not just the AI, it's the leadership role in ensuring that as we've got more domination from let me charitably say, an American approach to dealing with the creatives that's different from how we would do it. So
that's the discussion that sits with DCIT and DCMS in terms of what is the regime for usage of AI, and clearly we are.
Mr. I don't mean AI. I just mean more generally as we've got more streaming players, we've got more of an Americanization of the way that we're approaching creating content.
Once we're going beyond that, then I think there's a number of utterly critical things for the UK in terms of preserving public service broadcasting at scale, and the iPlayer being part. Now, there's a whole lot of levers that I think are necessary in terms of prominence, tax incentives. We could spend time on each of these things. If you look at the public service media plan from Ofcom, I thought their list was exceptionally good, by the way, in terms of things we need to do. More collaboration. How many players do we have? How many advertising houses do we have in the UK? All these things we need to get competitive, and the BBC can play a leading role in that. We're about to go to a big the annual industry shindig in Cambridge, or biannual in Cambridge, and that's absolutely what we're talking about. How do we get growth together? The BBC can play a really big role in that, big role, but it does need support to do that.
Thank you. Chair.
Blake Stevenson to ask some more questions about commercial investment, and then we'll just take after that a short break, 5 minutes, and then come back to further questions afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, please, for Lee on sustainable returns. How do you ensure that your commercial investment decisions maximise sustainable returns for the BBC?
Yeah, well, I think as a commercial business, there are clearly what we call hurdle rates or rates of return that we expect for any investment that BBC Studios is doing. It's also worth remembering that we are now using debt capital for some of our investment, and of course then the expectation is we must demonstrate return on that investment and our ability to see growth in that. So hurdle rates, rate of return are critical to all investment decisions that come up through the commercial board or through the investment committee and then the commercial board and made at the BBC. We also will review that as a group as a whole as well to hold them to account and deliver against those.
I'm glad you mentioned debt actually, because obviously borrowing limits went up, didn't they, 2021 from 350 million to 750 million. Obviously very large numbers, perhaps not large numbers if you compare them with some of the US behemoths as you're sort of comparing yourself to. But very large numbers nonetheless, and of course borrowing costs have gone up significantly since 2021. So how are you using the increased borrowing limit to drive returns? And what are your thoughts on sort of risk around borrowing and the extent to which you intend to use that limit?
Yeah. So we agreed that increase in the debt limit in step changes. So our current limit is at 600 million and it gets to 750 million. We report regularly through to UKGI, who absolutely assesses our performance, and I think that's an important part of a process that we go through there. Sorry, I have lost.
I guess the question is, what are you using the money for in order to drive sustainable returns for the BBC?
So we've particularly made a number of key investments. We've seen the benefit of wholly owning BritBox International, which has been incredibly important to us in our financial results in the last year. We also continue to invest in a number of labels or independent labels to varying degrees, some wholly owned and some partially owned. We've also seen investment in .com significantly. So when we look at we call them direct-to-consumer services, .com's been a very big part of that investment story as well. So we tackle it across both our content studio investment, but also our streaming business. So we have, as Tim was articulating, we have a sort of multiple approach. We don't put everything in one thing, and I think that's important because different things perform at different rates as well. But certainly that international investment in our .com and BritBox International have been very, very successful and are down to the results of the BBC Studios in the last year.
Totally. So two quick things. One is it's a very robust commercial board that has got huge experience in dealing with the answer to your question is utterly robust business cases with clearly articulated targets delivering return on investment, and then a management team that held account. The second point I make is the record of Studios is not bad on delivering, he says defensively, because if you look at acquiring half of UK TV, significant investment, buying half of BritBox off ITV, actually I would say the record of transactions has been highly accretive to the UK public in building the asset. So that is how, we have business cases that managers are held to account to, like any, dare I say, normal business. It's absolutely as you would expect and very robust.
Yet the dividend paid by BBC Commercial Limited to the Public Service Broadcasting Group was lower than last year. So why? What's your explanation for a lower dividend?
So we have been making decisions around cash dividend, so dividends declared versus the cash dividend paid. And actually, while Studios is in a debt position and Public Service is in a cash position, there have been just times where it's been more relevant to look at the cost base across the whole of the BBC to retain the cash in Studios, lower interest payments. We don't need the cash in Public Service. So whilst we declare the dividends, we have been making different changes around cash payments made across from Studios into the Public Service. I think that will be some of the challenges that you're seeing. But I think also we are taking a lot of money out of Studios, and I think at the moment we deliberately made that decision. It was well debated both across the Executive Committee, Commercial Board and the main board. But we continue to believe that the best use of capital for the group, for the whole of the BBC at the moment, is to invest in Public Service, particularly to ensure that we can continue to maintain our audience value. But that comes at a cost because we aren't reinvesting in our Studios business. So I'd expect to see that conversation continue. We need our Studios business to represent and to demonstrate that they can drive value that is greater than what we can get from that capital and that cash in the Public Service, and that's part of the expectation that we expect from Tom Fussell and his team to put a plan together that demonstrates strong growth and strong value creation, and then we will have a discussion about where that capital is best used across the organisation. But right now we are taking the majority of it into the public service, and I think that is not sustainable to deliver the growth and the ambition that we have for commercial, but that debate is important and it will continue.
It's really important, this, because the annual dividend is one metric of success, as you would, because it's also, are we investing to build the enterprise value over time, or the capacity for bigger, and sometimes you can't get that return going within 12 or 24 months. So you've got to make quite nuanced, to the point about capital allocation across group. I think we're more sophisticated than we've ever been, which says, okay, we need enough, to the earlier conversation, to ensure the UK public get enough content, sports rights, but meanwhile we don't want to, frankly, for want of a better word, milk the commercial arm to a point where it hasn't got the flexibility to invest against long-term value creation, which does two things. It builds, obviously, the enterprise value, but it also builds the engine itself to throw off more dividend over time. That is constantly being debated, that balance between short-term return. There's also a good and healthy degree of tension between it's not conflict, it's a natural tension between the commercial arm and the public service and group of where I sit with Lee to ensure that we're getting that balance right.
One final question, if I may, Chair, before the break. Just going back to borrowing, how comfortable are you with the level of borrowing given rising costs of borrowing? You know, how comfortable is the board? Any concerns whatsoever to share with the committee?
I think we're very comfortable with the current level of borrowing that we have in terms of our ability to repay it and meet any obligations that we have. It is something that we monitor very closely, particularly at the commercial board, given our obligations, banking obligations and others. We're very grateful for the increase, of course, in that to 750 million, and we believe we need it. We have ambitions to be able to reach more. And I think if we expect to be able to grow the commercial business like we can, then we think more capital is going to be required. And we'll be continuing to engage in those conversations with both DCMS and UKGI as we go through.
So we don't have to, in the short term, we don't have concerns. We're across some of the costs. I just want to emphasise our gratitude. We're really pleased we got that.
So you mentioned in the short term. So are you concerned in the medium and the long term?
I'm not concerned. Okay. Sorry, let me take the time length. Good pick up. I'm not concerned. I just want to emphasise Lee's point, which we talked about. I'm not trying on borrowing, trying to get to the US level or anything close. But if you look at an average commercial enterprise in terms of its gearing, we're still very low. That's not a plea for increased risk, but it is something that I think, to emphasise Lee's point, we should be investing in UK success stories. And I think there's a further conversation to be had about, if we've got those business proposals, should we be investing and ensuring we've got the facility to do that. And I think we'll constantly want to push a little bit on that, because I think there's some real opportunity here.
Thank you for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we'll now have a short break till 10 to. That gives us precisely 8 minutes. Could everyone make sure they're back by 10 to 5? Order. The butler's duly pressed. Thank you very much. And we move on now to future challenges of the BBC. Michael Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Just on audience targets, if I may, question for Mr Davie. The annual report and accounts reports that you are meeting or exceeding your headline audience targets, which you should be commended for. But how do you set these targets, and how do you ensure that they are sufficiently challenging, given that I think on every metric of the different headline audience targets you've set, you are meeting or exceeding them? Are they sufficiently challenging? How do you set them?
Yeah, good. We spend quite a lot of time on this. I think firstly, we built the targets when I took the job. The key question was, what level of usage do we need to deliver to ensure support of the BBC and the licence fee? And that's at a household level. So very simply, we said, okay, if 80%, and this was done by the research team and is scientific, which was, okay, if we get 80% of people using us a week, over 90% in a month, you broadly get the support. We then looked at time spent and what level of time spent, etc. I would say I am really pleased over the last 5 years that we've been managing, despite this phenomenal competition and almost infinite choice when you get home of an evening, to maintain most of our numbers. They are set with the agreement of the board, who put us under some pressure to stretch those numbers. If you're a board member, we present the targets. We say this is what it will result in. If I may, some of the targets are still quite tough to get to. Particularly among 1634s, we wanted 70% every week. We hit 67. I would say this year that number is under pressure. So I don't want to gloss everything. I think this is really tough to ensure you are relevant to every household when they've got so much choice. So that's how we set the targets. Annual plan. They go to the board. They are endorsed. We debate them. They might argue like you would against one number and say, look, you need to be more aggressive. And that's the kind of system we have. It's a fairly good system, I think.
Right. Just sort of go back full circle to where I was earlier about maintaining the trust of the British public. Reach and relevance is clearly absolutely critical to that. Dr. Shah, who's the chair obviously of the BBC, said at the CMS evidence session last week, and I quote, that we are really working hard at how we improve our content so that we speak to a variety of people.
Yes.
He went on to talk about the issue around portrayal and said the question of how do we portray groups across the country in terms of representation for him was a critical point really, and he drew a link between those having trust in terms of reach and relevance, seeing themselves reflected in the BBC, then perhaps wanting to pay for the service. So just off the back of the point that Dr. Shah made, but also the points you've just made, Mr. Davie, what does your socio-demographic data, the BBC's socio-demographic data, reveal about the BBC's reach and relevance? And how do you plan, based on what Dr. Shah said, how do you plan to engage other audience groups that perhaps you aren't reaching in a way that you would wish to?
Absolutely. It's an absolute central question there for a universal broadcaster, that every group and our value is spread equitably across geography, socio-economic group, different community. We track our data across all the groups, so I can give you, if you take percentage of each audience group, we think the BBC is effective at reflecting people like them. The good news is, broadly speaking, the differences aren't as extreme as you would think, but you can see differences. So we've traditionally been a little bit behind in areas like the north of England. The wonderful thing, by the way, was, and this does give some indication, we saw a uptick in 24-25 as you see all that work we've done in Salford, and it's not just that, it's the dramas. You'll have seen a noticeable shift in dramas being based in the north. We've got 60% of our programming now outside the M25. This doesn't have an effect on how people are seen. Now that links also to community and socio-economic groups. In terms of how we address the problem, I think there's a couple of things. One is, as I've said, move more of our output geographically around the country, where you get different perspectives and flavours, and that's absolutely right. I would say one area that's slightly slower and more demanding for us is actually changing who works at the BBC. Because actually that's you asked me what drives these things. I actually think having a sensibility within the organisation. And what I would say, and this is a broader issue in the creative industries, we're better than pretty much everyone in terms of, but we're still behind. If I look at we absolutely set targets in terms of whether it's BAME, people with disabilities, in terms of the organisation. Socio-economic mix in the media sector has been the hardest one to move. If you look at lower socio-economic groups, we're just under 21%, I think, at the moment, something like that. Actually, from a population point of view, I think it's the mid-30s. So this has always been an industry where you've got so to your point, and going back to it, we're tracking them. I can give you the metrics on any of these groups, and in terms of their overall usage of the BBC, their attitudes to the BBC, we track those at the executive level repeatedly, are very clear on them. It is reassuringly spread, but there are issues within it in terms of certain communities, certain places where you don't get quite the numbers you'd want versus the average. And the factors are make your content differently. I was in Birmingham last week, seeing we've moved the Asian network there, we've moved a lot of programming there, we've got Silent Witness, you'll see now, will be very well, you'll see Birmingham all over it. That does change appreciation among communities and different groups. That's what we've got to do.
You think there's sufficient effort from yourself, Tim, right down through all of the staff, but also the board as well, to sort of clearly you are tracking these things. You hear from focus groups, you hear from, as you would expect any organisation. But do you think there's sufficient effort for you all the way down through your staff and the board to kind of get out and listen directly to the amazing variety of communities and places that there are across the country? Because clearly the BBC is the sum of its parts, and the sum of its parts are the great British people. And the great British people don't just exist in the big metropolitan cities. They don't just exist in London. They're in the towns and cities that we all represent as MPs. And do you think there is that kind of drive amongst your staff to get out there and hear directly perhaps some of the frustrations, perhaps some of the questions people might have about whether they feel reflected and represented in the content they see in the BBC and how the BBC is managed and led? Speaking from the heart about this is clearly something I could see you're passionate about. Do you think that there is sufficient...
We can always do more. I think the BBC is absolutely at the races in terms of pushing out of London, going out there. I mean, I spend a lot of time in every city, from Nottingham to Stoke to, and you saw PM debates. Yeah. We definitely, it was lovely to see that at Nottingham Trent. But I think we are, it's a kind of yes, but answer. I think you can't meet anyone in the BBC who isn't completely committed to doing that. How far we've gone, and whether my chair is quite rightly pushing me harder with the exec team to say, this is great, but we need more power out of London. We have 40 of our, I think it's 90 commissioners, but I need to check that in terms of out of London now, but how many of the really senior ones? So I would take on, we've got more to do to the chair's challenge, and he's pushing hard, quite rightly, with the board to say, this is a mission critical thing. I think there's something deeper as well with institutions that we'll all recognise, which is if institutions feel distant from people and trust begins to erode, societal trust begins to erode, and I've talked about this at length in speeches and things, which is, I'm really worried about that personally. So I think there's a burning platform for institutions to be connected. Within that, of course, local provision. I always say, what's the biggest television programme on BBC One every day? It's the regional news, pretty much without exception, unless you've got a Strictly or a Traitors. But that becomes incredibly precious for us. So look, we're at it. Could we do more? Yes. Will you see more pushed out of London? Yes. Are we looking as we go to Charter to put more power out of London? Yes. We've just got to do more of it. Now, then linked final point is, could we do more research? We're doing a lot of research. We're out there speaking to a lot of people. I don't think we're in the ivory tower, but we could do more. And there is a worry that you go into an office or a production centre, and that is you can geographically relocate but still be in the bubble.
Yeah, and I think that point, just finally if I may change on this point, I think that point about connectivity is crucial. I've seen it, BBC Radio Nottingham, my constituents tell me often their only friend, they've lost a partner, they listen to the radio every day, and I think it's critical that we do not lose that content at a local level, because it provides that connectivity, it provides people feeling a sense of belonging in a country where they might feel distant from decisions that are being made. So I'm glad to hear that being reflected. Thank you, Chair.
I think local radio in particular is still a lifeline for many people. It may have an older audience, but it's something they really value.
There's absolutely no dispute about that. I'm very clear on, and I'm actually seeing, I'm pleased the Ray Jars in local. This is very sensitive because we kept the money in local, and I know there's been a lot of debate, but one of the things I would say is it did need more money in online journalism, making sure that we've got a full local provision. I hope coming to the Charter we see the investment so we can keep supporting and growing our local provision. I think it's critical for local democracy. I'm worried about the state of the local media. I think the local democracy reporting service has been strong. It's a whole discussion, this, but I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the Chair would be very supportive of the remarks you've just made. I think we need to step up.
Thank you. Just a passing comment. In Sheffield, local means Sheffield. It doesn't mean buying in something from Leeds.
Chair, one of the things I'm extremely cautious of is a Londoner turning up and lumping anyone together in one geographic unit. I have learnt to my cost a couple of times that can hurt. So Gateshead ain't Newcastle. So yeah, I've got it.
Yeah. Well, can I ask a follow-up on that point? So you mentioned local democracy supporters. Can I ask, what are you doing to ensure that the local democracy reporters are being truly local? Because there's a lot of the problems in local media means that local media is getting bigger in the areas that it serves. So how are you ensuring that local democracy reporters are actually in the areas that they're reporting?
Well, they are very well distributed, but then we are based on the current system, as we understand, as you would understand it, is demand-led. So people are drawing that down. I think to be honest, I think it's a fair question again for Charter, which is how do you keep improving? I'm very pleased with the scheme, but I think there's things we could look at in terms of who's using it, what's the depth of provision, how could we make sure it's working even harder for us. And that's going to be one of the things that, one of the questions is, how geographically spread is it, how interlocal it goes.
It's more the observation I'd make is that you could in theory provide a basic level of service in my constituency of Stirling from a desk in London. It wouldn't be a great service, but you could provide a basic level of service. So that sense of embedding local democracy reporting within a community, which has been the bedrock of local journalism for
I don't think we're looking in any circumstances a load of people sitting in London. I think the issue is what media organisations they're serving, and are we making sure they're really useful to the local papers, the smaller outfits. That is really important. But no, I totally take the point. I mean, a whole load of people sitting in London ain't going to get to the issues we're talking about.
My worry is more a lot of people sitting in Glasgow or Edinburgh covering Stirling and Perth. That's my more worry, is that as you push things out from London, you push them out, but you don't continue to push them out.
Then you get into Then you get into this question of how big is a hub, and this is a well debated topic. I think we would need more investment to push out even further to make sure. Because the other thing is, you're a junior journalist coming in to work with us. There is validity in being part of a hub and learning from each other. So there's the balance.
Say, certainly, I had a phone call just to begin this meeting from Lucy Ashton, the local democracy reporter in Sheffield, and she certainly is based there. I have to say that, and very welcome for her local knowledge, which is really important.
Thank you.
On to the issue of younger people in the audience, Sarah Green.
Thank you, Chair. How concerned are you that only 51% of those aged 16 to 34 feel the BBC reflects people like them?
What was the first bit of the sentence? How do I? Apologies.
Are you that only 51% of those aged 16 to 34 feel the BBC reflects people like them?
I think it's a really significant challenge that the BBC constantly has to say, okay, how are we relevant to that audience? How do we make the case? But critically, without losing our values. Because, I don't need to tell you, we're seeing this incredible ballooning of content. Much of it, by the way, as you know, polarised, not based on the editorial standards we'd expect. I think a couple of things. One is we are concerned about it. Two is we're really working hard now. I mean, we're the biggest news service, I think, on Instagram. We're working very hard with YouTube now. And it's not just about putting our content as it is today on YouTube. It's working with them on what works for that audience. And also, if I may, what are the kind of pressures we're going to put on the services in partnership with them to make sure that when you ask about what's happening on a news story, they are surfacing the kind of providers like the BBC. So I'm very concerned about it. We're working on action plans against the younger audiences. I think what doesn't work, if I may, is a massive lurch to youth and trying very hard to be the coolest one on the block. No, I'm just, because I think that obviously Radio 1 does its job brilliantly. All the things that we see the BBC doing. You certainly come to the BBC when you need a revision service with bite size. Yeah. So there's plenty. We're not out the game. I think, however, there is a real need for us to get into third parties and also make sure, to the earlier question about IP, we're creating big hits and big titles that attract that audience in. Because frankly, when we're airing one of our really big dramas that appeals to that audience, like if we were to drop a season of Peaky Blinders, you get a good audience of that. So that's what you need to find the sweet spot as the BBC. We're doing a lot of work on it.
Can I ask why the audience reach target for that cohort is lower than it is for everyone over age 16? Is there a reason for that?
I think it just reflects that there's no point to the earlier conversation about many of us will have set corporate targets. There's no point in putting 90%, and if you're currently at 67, we're currently at 60. Well, there's a different stats, but this is weekly usage at 67. What I need to do is set a reasonable target for that group for all the areas of the BBC. Then these targets get then deployed if you were running television and radio or news. Then break it down and say, okay, in sport we want this target. It's very practical. So if you're Alex Kajalski running sport, you have your targets that build up and it ladders up to the overall BBC. We want to make them demanding but also realistic. And the truth is, that age group are more promiscuous in terms of the amount of media they're using, the amount of choices they have. What we do know is, it is a pretty remarkable achievement that I would say that nearly 70% are still coming every week to the BBC. We're frankly the only UK player in the game on this. And I think as long as we get to that critical mass, I remain confident that we can deliver universality. That's what we're trying to do.
If trying to be the coolest isn't the strategy, which may be a very sensible move, what practical steps are you taking to try and...
Well, I think you've got to, let me give you a real example. Who's incredibly popular with young people? Our 99-year-old natural history presenter, who is a legend, who they trust. So the key thing is to be trusted, to be absolutely speaking with authenticity. They like people who cut through it and speak directly. So who are the people we're going to attract? The right presenters, the right talent, who can talk directly to young people, who they engage with. What are the right... They're also interested in format. So I don't believe in trapping public service broadcast in format. I do believe you can do a 2-minute thing on TikTok, but actually make sure it meets the BBC's editorial values. That is not dumbing down if you do it right. It may not be to everyone's taste. So I think it's who are the right presenters who understand that grammar, who can deliver that, and we're learning that. And I think that's all traditional media organisations are doing that. What I don't think you do is have to, I won't repeat it, but lurch to be, trying to take on TikTok at their own, a TikTok influencer at their own game. That's not what we should be doing.
Thank you, Jeff.
Do you think there's still a feeling that it's anti-BBC and it's a bit paternalistic and young people sort of don't feel comfortable with that?
I don't think so, actually. I think people... I've got a bit... I think it's just to say... I actually think when I was growing up, when we had 3 out of 4 TV channels, I'm that old, or, the limited number... Then I think you could say there was a bit more rebellion in the world to say, I don't want to be forced to watch these things. Actually, in the markets now, they've got infinite choice. I think that's by far the big... I don't think it's necessarily an anti-BBC sentiment. It's absolutely...
By anti, I meant anti like uncle, the paternalistic.
Yeah, maybe there's a bit of that, but actually we're not seeing that. What we're seeing is a very simple competitive situation, which is if you've got, you used to have 3 choices of viewing of an evening, now you've got almost infinite. What we do know is when the BBC delivers a European Championships where we all come together, which is incredibly precious for us, or England or Scotland, or abiding the national differences here, dangerous territory. Let's do the Olympics where we all come together. But that is incredibly there's no young people don't have an issue coming to the BBC. If Radio 1 Big Weekend arrives in Swindon or Dundee, it is transformational for the region. So I think we've got a brand which is trusted, which so-called young people will come to. The issue is, are we providing the content, and are we providing the connection that they want? I don't think it's defining that there's a rebellion against Auntie.
Right, looking at the benefit across the UK.
I'm going to start, if I may. So the BBC has very admirable plans to strengthen its delivery for all of the UK. I'm just reflecting on a PAC report from March 2024 where it said the BBC had begun implementing its programme without a clear plan and could not readily explain the expected impact and benefits for licence fee payers. So since you're here, would you perhaps take the opportunity to explain the plan and tell us what the expected impacts and benefits might be?
I'll start and then you might want to... Okay. So the plan is to move 700 million of spend out of London, fixed, okay? The forecast by 27-28 will be ahead of schedule, and we're forecasting 830 million at the moment, which is good news. And the actuals today is 412 million. We've relocated 400 plus EFTs, people, out of London. Within that, I could go through a number of... I'm really pleased about the progress. I think some of the... If you go to Newcastle, visit the tech hub of 100 people, it's transformational. We are increasing we said we're going to do 60% of our out of London spend on television. We're now at 61%. And we did with the last committee meeting about audio, where there was a bit of pressure. I'm pleased to say I was recently listening to the Radio 3 Breakfast Show from Salford and other titles, or I mentioned Asian Network a minute ago in terms of Birmingham last week. But we're now at 46% of network audio. I'm not talking about local radio or nations radio stations. Network audio spend out of London. So we're well on target, I think, to get to 50% by 27-28. I think we've relocated the right TV titles. We said we'd commission 100 scripted titles, including 20 in the nations. We've delivered that, and the target's been achieved. I won't go further. I think we've basically hit our numbers, or are going to hit our numbers in terms of the input side.
Yes.
Right.
Right. So I was going to come on to outputs and.
Right. So there's two
and how do you measure the benefits?
Right. So there's two outputs in mind. There's two major outputs, I think. One is, I think we've covered to a bit, and we've got all the numbers, which is the perception within a region of the BBC. And we are seeing, I mentioned, the north of England, for instance, significant improvement in 24-25 as we deploy more output. I mean, the 1 o'clock news now coming from Salford, breakfast, various dramas coming in from all across the north and beyond. That is it. We are trying to essentially level out the appeal and usage through the UK, and we're seeing that. The second is, frankly, even if I wasn't seeing everything happening perfectly in that regard, the economic effects, and I really recommend speaking to some of the regional mayors. If you take the West Midlands Combined Authority and what they were they've just committed to further investment, a second MOU to keep delivering for areas like Digbeth, where we're relocating into Digbeth. This has created, without doubt, confidence for other organisations to commit. I think we're nearly up to 1,000 jobs in one street with Silent Witness, MasterChef, all the various things that are going on. We then, to your point about targets, we then have been looking at the overall economic value to a region. So in Birmingham, I was just fresh from there, so I've got the figures in my head. In the West Midlands, we expect that in the course of a decade, we'll bring an additional 282 million in GVA to the region, and this represents an increase of 44% by our actions, supported obviously by the West Midlands Combined Authority and Create Central. So there's two things here. There's the audience output and there's the regional economic output and its effect on the overall creative industries growth plan, which I think is profound. And this isn't just Birmingham. If you went to Salford, I could give you lots of detail. The North East with Kim McGuinness and Ben Houchin supporting our plan there, increased investment. We've got the combined authorities and the local councils all coming in on that. The tech hub in Newcastle, the Cardiff economic analysis we've done for the region with the Welsh Government, and I won't go on, but that's how we assess whether it's working. So even if you weren't getting all the audience measures perfectly, this is just a good thing to do.
Well, I was just going to ask in that. Yes, I actually agree with that. Can I congratulate you and applaud you on what you're doing? So if I'm sounding like I'm being a bit too picky now, it's part of what the committee's there to do. Sometimes when I hear that is London everywhere else, and then we can create examples.
Yeah.
But for every one regional one, I think you mentioned the North East, you can say this is doing remarkably well. I think it's about assuring the committee and assuring yourself that there's a perception overall. I can say in Scotland, for example, that the perception of the BBC, you've got sometimes more of a challenge over the last decade or so in certain areas. Now I think you're doing a good job, and I think the perception is good. But there's a definite Scottish approach to the BBC that is different to a London approach. It's definitely different to a North East. So making sure that you're getting a balanced approach across all of the nations and all of the regions to ensure that you are the UK public broadcaster rather than just London and everywhere else, which is one of my frustrations as a Scottish MP, an awful lot about the capital. It very much comes across a lot of things as London and everybody else.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think we are changing. And I think if you look at the story in the nations, whether that be Scotland or... Look, you don't need to tell me that over the last decade there's been various views from Scotland on how the BBC are doing, and we've got debates about individual productions, but the overall direction of travel... I mean, I was on the Isle of Harris watching that, a drama being shot for the first time that we've had in the Highland, network drama. This is real progress, You look at those titles, the number of titles now that are coming from Scotland, it's growing. But what I would say is the BBC drama is 31 titles a year. Okay, it's not 300. So there is a balance now in terms of, I don't want to have a system where we go, we're going to do exactly, we are committing to more drama in different places, but we have to also have some flexibility in the system to go where creatives are going and have a degree of organic response to the best creative work. And that's what we're trying to do. But look, your points are well taken. I am definitely of the view that the BBC should not be thinking London and beyond, it should be thinking everywhere. And that bridge we're crossing, I think.
Okay, I think we'll move on now, if you wouldn't mind, to talk about that transition to online. So if I refer back to the Public Accounts Committee report, this is back in March 2023, but one of the recommendations is the BBC should develop a detailed plan, including scenarios for how it could switch to an internet-only future, working with government, audience representatives and wider stakeholders to ensure no one is left behind. Now, in response to that, the BBC said, OK, we take the point, let's move on with that. How are you getting on?
There's been some progress in terms of us internally. Obviously, we've done work on what are the kind of triggers and what would you need to do to try and effect a transition that critically would ensure that no one is left behind. I mean, that is key. The BBC's got no interest, and this is not, I know we're at PAC, but it's not primarily about cost saving. Okay, we can talk about the costs and distribution, but it's primarily about, I think, a number of households not benefiting from being online, so they can't get those services, they can't respond in the way. I mean, I think this is a big conversation that we should be having publicly around this. I think what we've said is we do need clarity over time from government, because it's not something the BBC can do alone in any way, shape or form. There has to be a decision from government in terms of whether they want to lay out the track and the criteria by which a transition could happen. And what that obviously means is you need to, it may not be an exact date, but you need to say, we want to go here, these are the kind of things we're going to do to help people, and these are the kind of triggers that would lead you to have confidence that you could affect a transition.
And I talk about the timescales, and my constituency is Stirling and Strathallan. It's predominantly a rural constituency, and my mailbox is full of people who are complaining about their inability to get a digital service. And for those that do have a broadband service, it ain't of a level where they can do streaming. Right. So they can possibly send a slow email to me complaining about the fact that they can't do streaming, but they definitely can't do the streaming. Now, I used to work in electrical retailing, so my family business was selling televisions, and I remember the digital switchover when we had that last remaining handful of people who required a set-top box, so we just gave, we gave them one. There was funding to give them one.
Yeah, I remember.
Once you get to that point, you can't simply give somebody a television that can access iPlayer if they can't physically get the internet at all. So I worry that there is a disconnect between the ambition to do this in the 2030s from a BBC point of view with the ability to get universal coverage for broadband access, which, to be fair, does not look like it's going to be the 2030s. I could be wrong. I wonder if you comment on the timescales.
Well, it's simply that our timescales are dependent on what you've outlined. The BBC has got no desire to have people who can't get our services. Yeah. So I think that is absolutely, it's a broader conversation than the BBC, but unless you have that universal provision of a basic broadband, we can 20 megs, whatever it would be, to ensure you can stream video, then the BBC would have an issue with affecting the transition. Now, what I do think is over time, if you get the number to be small enough, you can think about solutions, you can work on technology will be developing rapidly in terms of possible solutions for that. I mean, I was involved in the transition to DTT, and we put FreeSat in for, solving issues. Are there other areas, this isn't my area of total expertise, but I'm sure if we said together as the UK, we've got 1.5 million households left, that are unconnected. How can we make sure they do have connection? Part of that will be that they're just not connected yet. The other is, to your point, they don't have the connection. But the BBC is not just sitting here saying we want to switch over come what may. We absolutely see a condition of that as being people have provision of a decent broadband service that's affordable. And that needs to be part of an overall government plan to transition. What I worry about, and this is beyond a little bit my bailiwick, which is what I worry about is I would think that more broadly for the UK, there would be an incredible benefit to have everyone connected. Yeah? So in terms of the ability to ensure that they can get all services, you can think about other government services, you think the cost savings, the ability for us to connect with people, potentially in remote areas as well. That is not for the BBC. To be fair, there are limits to our powers. What we're there is to provide fantastic online services that would be. We're more on the pull side than the push side, but you have to fix the push side.
There's an existential part of what the BBC is, which is you give me £170 a year and we will broadcast radio, we'll broadcast television. It's been that way for 100 years. You're moving to a world now where there will be an additional cost. There will be a cost of the broadband service itself. So in a digital world, you've now got my £170 licence fee or whatever it will be, plus the £20 plus service to get a broadband connection. So the cost to access a BBC service will be £170 plus a minimum of £240 to get your broadband on top of that.
Yeah, if I may, I think there's a couple of things. Broadband penetration is pretty significant in the UK today. Yeah, so it's not an incremental cost. I would think most people, certainly people in my household, would prioritise it over any other service. So I don't think it attributes straight to the BBC. I think there's a particular question, which is if we were to effect a switchover, for a group of people who haven't transitioned, what would the level of affordability be? The services that you could provide for that. But I take your point, but the BBC can't take that on. I think we have to be helping. It has to be for government and others to say, we want a broadband transition for the UK, because actually from a global competitiveness point of view, from a cost-based point of view, that makes total sense. Then the BBC can be part of that.
But as you move to a digital future now, what if your timescale is out of kilter with the broadband provision?
But I just said it won't be out of kilter, because that would be that would be a self-inflicted wound. I can't see why.
No, but if you forgive me, what will happen is that you are on a journey of moving to digital services, BBC iPlayer. Yeah. As you are on that journey, there will be a handful of people, a significant handful of people in mainly rural areas that will be getting. They can't access BBC Sounds. They can't access BBC iPlayer. BBC Sounds, I think, is fantastic. It offers a depth to audio that you just can't get through radio, and I think radio is fantastic. But you will move as you prioritise certain services to a world where some people are being marginalised and they're getting less for the £170 if they don't have a broadband connection than they will if they do have a broadband connection. So I'm sure they're not getting left behind.
I think what we've got to do is make sure the broadcast component of the BBC is very significant and retained through that period. So yeah, we're already at the point where if you've got the vast majority of people have got broadband and they can get all these services, they can go online and get the news, that it would be absurd for us not to offer that service. But the idea we're giving up on broadcast, is not right. We remain utterly committed to DAB, to DTT during this period. I'm in danger of repetition, which is we must be, to your point, offering a level of services that makes sense for the licence fee through broadcast through the period. Agreed. And that is important for us. What I do think, and I'll come back to it, is I think we need to make a decision, and it's a policy decision, it's a governmental decision on the direction in terms of what the vision is, because I've got the issue, your issues are extremely well articulated, they resonate, but at the end of the day, it's whether we have an appetite to say there's 2 million households we need to sort out, and we'll find a way. Now, that's a question that we can contribute to, because television is one of the things people most worry about. And we do not, but I don't want to see a position where anyone can't get their television services from the BBC. That would be absurd.
You may have answered my question, my final question, at least partially, but just to be absolutely clear, given all of that context, which platforms and services are you prioritising for future funding?
I think the first thing is we're prioritising content. And I don't want to be a clever answer, but it's really important that. So I'm prioritising making sure I've got a incredible drama offer, the sports rights we secure, thank goodness for listed events. Then once I do that, I can then, the distribution is critical but secondary to a degree versus the content. Yeah? So, and also it's dependent on what content we've got, because much as I love on demand, if you're watching a sports, you know, if you're going to watch the women's rugby, it's you want to watch it live, largely. So we're not prioritising in a way that says we're going to move off live television or move wholly to. We do want to ensure that the content we commission can work on demand and can work on iPlayer, and it's not solely for linear. That is true, because we're trying to stretch our budgets, but we're not binary in that way and saying it's all got to be on demand. I mean, frankly, the Today programme is not about being on demand. Yeah, it's about the clues in the title. So I just think we will prioritise the content people want.
Thank you.
Finally?
Well, Mr. Davie, I don't know if this is an unfair question to ask you at the very end of the session, because we could be here for a while, I suspect. But I wonder if you could I want to talk about you moving on to preparing for the Charter review process. What are the opportunities and risks for the BBC from any change to the Charter or the licence fee model?
There's lots of risks and lots of opportunities. And I think when I think the opportunities are we can, and I work on the government's position on this, which is we've got the opportunity for a generation to protect and nurture and grow public service broadcasting for the next generation. And I said to the committee the other day, if you want cheering up, just go fly anywhere in the world or take the train anywhere in the world and talk about the BBC. And I am incredibly proud of what we've achieved through public service broadcasting. The opportunity is we're able to preserve that. Now, what does preserve that mean? And we've set out clear principles about what we think about the funding and the BBC. Firstly, in terms of the overall governance, and I think it is critical that we have an independent free media, of which the BBC is the centrepiece, and maintaining its independence. I mean, we'll be publishing, actually, I emailed quite a few million people. We've had a lot of responses, nearly 900,000. I think some of these messages will become very clear, but making sure that we've got an independent BBC that can report without fear and favour, and in a context where we meet our editorial standards. Sometimes we make mistakes, but overall we're doing our work. And the other thing is we're not a market failure broadcaster where we just do things others could never do or genres they could never do. We are an intervention that turbocharges the creative industries, and I do believe we're venture capital in that way for the UK PLC. So that's the opportunity. There's now linked to that is a opportunity to ensure that we have a universal funding mechanic that is absolutely ensures that we are serving everybody rather than a proportion of the population, and puts us under pressure to do that, but also a chance to reform the system so we ensure it reflects usage for the next decade, ensures that we've got the right enforcement in place and has got the right scope. And those questions, I think, I'm looking forward to getting on with it. I think, we'll have the green paper and the terms of reference, I think, in October, and then I think we're in full swing towards the white paper, and the opportunities are huge.
The model, the sort of 10-year model, as I'm learning about this, seems odd in one way. How much does that uncertainty about your funding from 2027 onwards impact your ability to set savings targets and make investment decisions?
Want to give that a go?
Well, I think no doubt the BBC's financials are under pressure, and we constantly are looking at how we become more efficient. We've talked about earlier today a decline in licence fee. I think it's really interesting to us how we can reform the licence fee through the Charter, and that's going to be important so we can maintain a universal BBC. That will be an important part of maintaining that income that allows us to stay as a universal public service broadcaster. But costs are increasing. And when we look at our forecasting models out through the next Charter, we do that process, we're actively in that process now as we prepare for the Charter conversations, and we do see funding challenges. And I think that is of concern to us, particularly if we can continue to deliver, and we need to continue to deliver, the range of audience services that we do today, and particularly, as you've just been talking about, that balance between the digital, the costs of moving to digital, that's where lots of our audiences are, particularly the young, but also our ability to maintain the cost to deliver a broadcast service through for those who take a very, very long time, if indeed even get to a broadcast or an online capability. So those are absolutely the challenges that we're having to grapple with, and it will mean we will consistently look at how we can deliver, I think it's our obligation to, how we can deliver an efficient BBC, but it is stretching, as we've talked about earlier today, into some of our content areas, which we have been trying to minimise over the last savings programmes, and I think that will be a challenge for us going forward.
There's no doubt that, every organisation has their uncertainties. It might be market uncertainty, it's all kinds of things. You never get it perfect, as this group knows. There is no doubt that the BBC is slightly unique, relatively unique in having this big moment. You can only forecast within reason. You'd be doing the same as us, which is say, okay, assuming an income of this or that, what kind of choices would we have to make? And of course we're doing that work. Of course we are. I think what's fascinating for us is, I do think we've got a real choice, because at the moment we can't continue where we are. So at the moment, going forward, just want to be clear about the BBC where we're at. Is we will need reform of the licence fee. Just going on as we are and saying, look, it's fine, is not, in my view, not a sustainable position. We need to think about how we increase investment in the BBC, think about the scope of the fee, all the things we do, and I urge everyone to really look at that sensibly, because we can't just put our head in the sand and assume we're going to keep. No one should be thinking we're just continuing as we go. In my view, and the second is, I am also. It relates to a lot of the conversation we've had today, which is we also need to look at what's the right investment, what's the right value for an average. Is there such a thing? A UK household in any town, in any street, and go, what is a good proposition in terms of value for that household? Because everyone's, this is tough for households. They're all under pressure. So the BBC's not sitting here and saying, just radically increase the fee. But I also think there's a question of, you cannot divorce the funding mechanic from the editorial. We are now at a point where way over 90% of our money goes straight through to the public in terms of content. We're stripping down our costs. You can see what we've done. That means we have a really interesting conversation to have in terms of how much investment do we need based on where the global economy is, where the global players are, to ensure that the BBC remains healthy. Because chipping away at it for years on end will not work. We've got to make some serious decisions. We haven't even mentioned World Service. We've got to make some serious decisions about what a fee covers, how do we charge people, and what's included. I think without that level of radicalism, we're not going to safeguard public service broadcasting for a generation. I really don't. I think we'll be not getting the right solution.
We've got you back for World Service later, but thanks for me just now. I'll hand back to the chair.
Yes. So, in terms of the Green Paper, would you want that to pose questions that we could get a public response to, rather than simply telling the public what's going to happen?
My understanding, this is a question that's probably best placed to the DCMS.
I was asking what you wanted to see from it.
But I think it's absolutely appropriate that you have a phase of the process where stakeholders, others input on what they want to see from the BBC. Now, we're obviously talking and having mass consultation with our audiences and talking to people, but it's absolutely right that government is open to hear from people.
That's how you want it framing.
I think that's an absolutely sensible. That's a totally sensible process.
Yeah. But then you'd want to see the consequences spelt out if we didn't have change and we just...
I think that's not... I'm not the expert on exactly different papers, but that would be the process by which you then go from the green paper where you're listening, you're evaluating. I think framing it in the context of, and this is again for DCMS and the government, but framing it in the context of how we support public service broadcasting is incredibly helpful. And nurturing the BBC and ensuring we get the maximum economic growth. I also think this isn't just about economics; it's about society, how we, societal cohesion, national security. All those things need to, be positively put out as questions. I think. Then I think it's quite right that obviously you then get to a white paper and you get towards solutions where you then have to set out your stall and say this is what you've chosen. And this is what you've chosen not to do, because it's all about choices. And I think we'll be very proactive in that process in supporting others as they work their way through it.
Thank you. Right, and just one point. We have talked about the World Service. I know it's a separate issue. We won't go into that in particular. Just an anecdote I would give. Some years ago, it's a few years ago now, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and we had a guide with us, local guide. And when we talked about the UK and what he knew, it all came from the World Service.
Absolutely.
And I said, why do you listen to the World Service? He said, because I don't believe anything the local people tell me, because they tell me what I want to hear. I trust the BBC. And I think that says an awful lot. So a guide walking up a mountain in Africa says an awful lot the BBC's reach, and we shouldn't lose that, I think, either.
One is we are the most trusted news brand in the world. Yeah. Two is the amount of investment that China, Russia, the manoeuvres of Iran and others to spread wholesale disinformation or agendas that are not in our national interest are very significant. And when I mean national interest in the broadest sense, democratic society, open debate, we have a short-term challenge in that we were very grateful to increase a little bit of extra money from the government. So we're at 262 million, we're now at 137 from government. I won't go back into the archaeology of the fact that my view is that UK licence fee payers shouldn't be paying this. I think it should be funded through central government. I think we have some real choices to make. We're reaching, overall as a BBC, more than 400 people a week. It's an incredible national asset. It's never been more important, I think, in terms of our reputation. And I think that we are very clear that there's a short-term ask in the funding round now, in the spending round, which I think will be critical, that we get some increased funding. But then there's a much bigger conversation that links to the Charter conversation, which is what is our long-term ambition based in the hundreds of millions of pounds that are being flung at us? Do we want to keep our position? Because we're defying gravity on our budget at the moment versus what we're facing. And this committee will know that we've had frequencies snapped up by other bad actors and others. So I think we've got a big choice for the World Service.
Okay. On that point, Director General and your colleagues, thank you very much indeed for coming today. An uncorrected transcript of this hearing will be published on the committee's website in the coming days. The committee will, of course, consider the evidence provided and we will produce a report in due course. Order, order. That brings us to the end of our proceedings.